Good morning. I'm Alice Newland. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County. On behalf of the League, I welcome you to our hot topic presentation, water. It's a key element we all have to have, and it's necessary for life itself. But are we protecting it and ensuring clean and healthy water for our present use and in the future? Manatee County experienced a 24% increase in population between 2010 and 2020. We expect a 50% growth in our population in the next 25 years. Manatee and Sarasota are the 10th fastest growing regions in the United States. These pressures on our infrastructure and the demand for potable water will be immense. The National Geographic recently had an article on the current state of the Floridan aquifer, and it's very concerning. Demand for the water is high, and so more water is being taken from our aquifer than is being returned through rainfall. Half the water is used to mow water lawns. Sea levels are rising, and we are seeing the intrusion of salt water into our aquifer. Many other commercial uses of our water are impacting the sustainability of our current water supply. The water quality could also be concerned given the current proposal for an injection well from the Piney Point close to our aquifer, but our presentation today will be focusing on potable water and the aquifer and maintaining water quality. So it can be addressed, but very briefly. We have with us today three key experts on what we are doing in Manatee County to deal with this issue today, in the future, on water protection, distribution, and water uses. After their presentations, the speakers will be answering questions. So please put your questions in chat. Our panelists today are Jack Merriam, retired environmental scientist, and I have put his background in chat, quite impressive and quite extensive. Dennis Ragosta, Government Affairs Regional Manager for the Southwest Florida Water Management District, sometimes called SwiftMud, and Katie Gilmore, Water Division Manager for Manatee County's Utilities Department. So let's welcome our first speaker, Jack Merriam. Jack?
Good morning, afternoon, sorry. We're into the afternoon already, and I'm going to share my screen here and get started. Let's see. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to try and cover a short 160 million year history of water management and then zoom back as close to home here in Manatee County as I can get. You might have seen this interesting quote that's reputedly from Mark Twain. And indeed, we have been fighting over water for a number of years now. California famously in the Owens Valley and the Colorado River when they moved water, and in here in Florida as well, in the Tampa Bay region, ranchers have actually blown up or threatened to blow up water transmission systems. The Florida Veterans for Common Sense thinks that droughts and floods will be and caused by climate change will be a national security issue because they will cause mass migration. So here in Florida, some of our water wars include an interstate war with Georgia, Alabama, over the Apalachicola, Flint, and Chattahoochee rivers, and closer to home, the intrastate water wars of the Tampa Bay region, where Pinellas County back in the 60s, I think, overpumped their wells, induced saltwater intrusion, and then began buying well fields in Pasco and Hillsborough, and indeed, in my opinion, overpumped those and actually caused lake drawdowns in those counties. So that led to the formation of the West Coast Regional Water Supply Authority, which was a multi-jurisdictional entity, and it, for some reason, never really succeeded, and it morphed into Tampa Bay Water, which seemingly has been a success in trying to regionalize water and get multiple sources into the mix. And then here, closer to home, we established the Peace River, Minnesota Regional Water Supply Authority that supplies Manatee, Sarasota, DeSoto, and Charlotte counties with water. As we look across the United States, we see that water laws are very different. In the West, they used the French system of prior appropriation, and you can see the East-West split. In the East, we adopted the English riparian system of water law, and which allows property owners to use water on or adjacent to their property. Whereas out West, you might buy a piece of property and not have any water rights. And back in the late 60s, I think, the University of Florida Law School got a grant from the US Department of Interior to develop a model water code. And Dean Frank Maloney, who was a professor of law and dean at the University of Florida Law School, developed this model water code. And in 1971, we had a severe drought in South Florida. And that was the basis, the reason for the passage in 1972 of the Water Resources Act, which became Chapter 373 of Florida statutes. And one of the unique things about this system for managing water, in my opinion, is that it requires that water be allocated to natural systems via minimum flows and levels. And Maloney said that that was one of the most important things that at the time we spoke had not been done. The other thing that this law did is to establish water management districts to manage water throughout Florida. And it had proposed a state water board, but that became the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And it provided for a state water plan made up of water use and water quality. In 1949, flooding in South Florida led to the establishment of the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control District. And in 61, the Southwest Florida Water Management District due to Hurricane Donna and flooding that occurred. And then when the Water Resources Act passed in 1972, those were incorporated with 3 new districts. So Florida is now covered by 5 water management districts, which in 1976, with a constitutional amendment overwhelmingly passing, all have ad valorem taxation authority. So the Department of Environmental Protection, does an annual water supply plan, and we are doing a regional water supply plan for the Peace River, Minnesota Regional Authority. If you wanted additional information on water resources, there's a hard copy of something called the Water Resources Atlas of Florida, and there's an online Water Atlas of Florida that has covers both Tampa Bay, there's a Sarasota Water Atlas, and so on. If we want to talk about water and water management in Florida, we need to talk a little bit about geology. 160 million to 23 million years ago, all of Florida and the West Florida shelf were covered in a shallow tropical sea. And so the edge of this, the West Florida shelf is at about, when you drop off of that edge, the water in the Gulf is about 10,000 feet deep, and goes as deep as 12 to 14,000 feet. And as sea level receded, we were left with the Florida Peninsula. And all of this is underlain by a carbonate platform, basically limestone, which is one of the reasons that it's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it's very permeable, moves water fairly easily. And the curse is it's very permeable and it moves water easily. And this graphic in gray shows the area where the Floridan aquifer underlies all of Florida. And the brown areas, it actually outcrops to the surface. And you can notice that it underlies all or parts of 5 southern states. And throughout the state of Florida, we use different aquifers. And the yellow here is where the predominant source of water is the Floridan. And in blue in South Florida, it's the Biscayne aquifer, I think considered, if not the most productive aquifer in the world. It's right up there. And then in our area, we use a combination of Floridan intermediate aquifers and sand, shallow sand aquifers. And one of the things that being underlain by limestone does is it makes us particularly vulnerable to sinkholes, because anything that's acidic on the surface tends to eat away the limestone base that we're all sitting on. And there's a downward pressure from water in the water table and in the aquifers near the surface, and water in the Floridan aquifer is pushing upward. Now, when we pull out a lot of that water in the Floridan aquifer that's pushing upward and holding the land surface, we may experience collapses, which are sinkholes. And here's a sinkhole. And again, I'm going to try not to focus too much on phosphate mining, but I've got a number of things in my presentation here. Here's the results of acid eating away limestone. And this was in the Bartow area when a phosphogypsum stack caused a sinkhole, which basically swallowed that phosphogypsum stack. And you can get an idea of the size from that helicopter flying over it. One of the interesting things to note is, we may hear more from Swiftmud about this, the Southern Water Use Caution area, and where are the recharge areas for the Floridan aquifer, and the most productive ones in this shown in this graphic. A lot of them are in Polk County, where a lot of our mining occurs. And again, the mining waste is very acidic waste. And again, this shows where the mining is occurring, and a lot of that is in that same high recharge area. So I'm just going to flash through this. This is my history of phosphogypsum stacks in Florida. And you can see that we have had a substantial number of phosphogypsum stack failures. Again, it's a combination of things. Climate change will exacerbate this. Hurricane Francis caused the Riverview stack to fail. Heavy rains caused a failure of a stack that discharged into the Alafaya River, killing everything for about 42 miles downstream. This is a graphic that shows where our recharge is occurring. And it's basically, most of our recharge is going to be, if we are talking about our aquifer systems, the upper Floridan or the intermediate aquifer, it's occurring somewhere in the interior portion of the state. So things that happen in our region polluting groundwater may not directly affect our drinking water, because our drinking water is coming perhaps from a long way off and may be very old water. By the way, we can carbon date water, and in many instances, it's thousands of years old. The ocean is pushing salt water. We are, again, a limestone platform here, and there's fresh water in our aquifer systems, and that fresh water is pushing against the ocean. As the ocean rises, we will see more pressure exerted by salt water into our freshwater aquifer. And if at the same time we're pulling out fresh water, there's less of a opposing force, and we will experience greater and greater saltwater intrusion. This is a well east of Sarasota, where we can see the water level between 1930 and 2010. And you see a continuous downward spiral on the water level due to water use. And droughts and a number of things can affect our water levels as well, of course. Kissingen Springs was the headwaters of the Peace River, and it flowed continuously most years. It stopped flowing in or around 1950. And one of the dominant impacts was phosphate pumping. And I think SwiftMud has been working to try and restore some of that flow for a number of years now. Rainfall in our area used to come in small storms. The stormwater arena. But as climate changes, we're seeing, as you see here in the graphic on the right, an increasing slope, meaning that our rainfall is more intense, and those heavier rainfall events are much harder to manage with our stormwater infrastructure, and thus we are seeing more of these kind of events, which happened in Manatee County during the no-name storm in 2017. Heavier rainfalls takes longer to drain. Our pipes are sized to handle historic storms, and as we get heavier and heavier storms, they will overwhelm the size of our existing infrastructure. As we think about water, we need to also recognize the interrelationship between water and energy. The graphic on the left is the FP&L power plant in Parrish, and you see Lake Parrish there. That's the freshwater cooling system for two gas-fired so-called peaker power plants. Peaker power plants are brought online at peak times of the day when they need the most power. They are in the process of replacing those gas-fired power plants that require cooling water with a 409 megawatt solar system connected to a battery storage system that will allow them to pull that power up fairly instantaneously, solar power, and again, won't need any cooling water. Many of our water treatment, all of our water treatment plants require electricity to operate. We move water long distances, say from the Peace River or the Manatee River. We treat it, that takes energy, and the chemicals that we use to purify our water take energy to produce. The Union of Concerned Scientists created this graphic showing water supply stress due to power plants around the United States. And you can see that here in our area, they are showing a medium level, moderate level of water stress due to need for power plant cooling water. Another stressor, and I think Alice talked about this as she opened, 50% of our highly treated potable drinking water is used on our lawns. More and more, we are going to reclaimed water rather than using this high quality water. But that's an easy, relatively easy thing to augment our water supply by ceasing to require 50% of our drinking water to go on our lawns. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. For each inch of rainfall on 1,000 square feet of roof, we can produce 600 gallons of water. And the interesting thing in this graphic to me is you can see that the gutters are routing the water onto the hardscape, onto the concrete driveway, which gets it very rapidly into the street, which gets it into the storm drain, which gets it into our bay, carrying lots of pollutants. So there's a lot to be said for capturing that water, or put in this particular photo. As I look at that grass, I can't understand why they didn't put it on that grass, which appears, and it could be something else, but it certainly appears to be suffering from water stress. And right here in Bradenton area, we have a good example of an alternative to those highly landscaped and irrigated lawns. This is a development called River Forest on the Braden River. And this is the architect developer's house on the left, where he has merely removed enough of the native vegetation to fit his house in. This is a permeable parking area. Whoops. And he's used permeable paving throughout the development. It's a small, I think it's 25 to 30 homes in the area, but it's a good alternative in my mind. And years ago, we did some water quality sampling, trying to analyze what was coming out of this development and into the Braden River, and had automated sampler there for a year, and it never produced any runoff or enough runoff for us to sample. So it was rather infiltrating and recharging groundwater. Cisterns, again, can be used for water supply and to reduce runoff. On the left here is a cistern that was built using a SWIFMUD, a Southwest Florida Water Management District grant, to capture water off the roof of the Hillsborough County Courthouse and use it for irrigation of the landscape there. And a sculpture, we partnered with the Arts Council there. They hired a sculptor. So this is actually an artwork, and it's Greek. It's supposed to be a Greek ruins. And then and those columns are holding water, and there's a huge tank beneath the ground. This is the 4th Street Fire Station in downtown Sarasota. Large metal cisterns capture water off the roof, and you can see that downspout, which then is holding water and gives enough hydraulic pressure to lift the water up and into this tank. And this is a rain garden treating stormwater prior to discharge. So my list of continuing threats to water resources in our area are building more impervious surfaces, which reduce recharge and increase runoff, and therefore pollution to our bay, using high quality treated potable water on our lawns after we've expended a lot of energy to get them to that level of quality. Over pumping of our groundwater. Again, a lot of our groundwater is thousands of years old. We did carbon dating a long time ago when I worked for the St. Johns River Water Management District. And we determined that the water that was being withdrawn in Jacksonville was about 22,000 years old. Phosphogypsum stacks, because of the acid and the fact that they may lead to sinkholes in a groundwater recharge area, I think is a continuing threat. And sewage treatment plants and septic tank discharges, particularly of poorly treated or untreated effluent. And with that, it's time to flow on to our next speaker. And I think that's Dennis.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Jack. I appreciate that. Great presentation, by the way. My name is Dennis Ragosta, and I serve as the Government Affairs Regional Manager for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. And in my role, what I primarily do is work as a representative for the district throughout Manatee and Sarasota County, working with local governments, municipal leaders, help identifying potential projects, utility projects, water conservation projects, water supply, natural system and restoration projects throughout Sarasota and Manatee County to help conserve water and to look on the broad scale of what we possibly need for future resources. So we've had a lot of projects with Manatee County through our cost share program, where we have a 50-50 cost share program. And if Manatee County wanted to come in for a public water supply project, and they thought it was a great idea, and our staff was able to evaluate it and look over it over time, and we thought it was a great match and had a regional impact, then we would have a cost share program where we split 50-50. We actually just wrapped up our applications for fiscal year 2022. So it's a great time. It's a great program to help identify it, any future needs or resources. And I really enjoy working with Manatee County as well as other elected officials throughout the area and help protecting future water resources and conserving water resources as we know it. The district does a great job working with local communities through our communications team, help promoting water conservation from a communications level. Every year we dedicate a month, April, when we work with local governments and present ordinances and help highlight the month of April as Water Conservation Month. And we help educate the public on letting them know during this time of the month, when it's usually not a rainy season, it's more so a dry season, to help, not water your lawn as much, and as well to maybe not run the shower as long as you can, and just be water smart is what we like to call it with the district. And one of the great aspects of the district being a regulatory agency is our water use permitting department does a great job of making sure that our water uses for future resources and current resources are always protected by issuing correct permits. These can range all the way from someone wanting public supply to agricultural to industrial or commercial, all the way down to landscape and recreation. And today we have April Breton, who serves as our water use permit evaluation and compliance manager. Her staff kind of hold the keys, so to speak, to the water use permit evaluations and what we issue. So she's gonna touch a little bit on what the district does today, how we issue our permits, as well as how we help conserve future water resources through our permitting department. And April, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Good afternoon, everyone. I was trying to put my video up, but I think because the screen is there. But yes, the water use permitting section in regulation at the district, we have a total of 28 staff people. About half review our water use permits, and the other half help permittees, some of them enter their data in to make sure that permittees are staying in compliance. And then I have about 10 staff people who do look over what's reported to the district to make sure that our permittees are staying in compliance with water use permits. We can go to the next slide, please. So the Water Management District has rules and guidelines and policies that we have to follow when we receive a water use permit application. So we go through Chapter 373, Part 2. There's a lot of numbers after that, but I'll just have that up there so you guys can see all of the things that we have to look at when and before, while we're looking at a permit. And well, sorry, the chat pops up, so I got a little distracted there. But then we look at section 6240 for water use importation rules, chapter D2 FAC, that's the Florida code, and that's for our water use permits. And then staff looks at the water use permit application handbook, which we have permittees and consultants do for questions when their applications are in-house and when we're reviewing them. So as long as everything is in check, then we can go ahead and issue water use permits, and they have to meet the conditions for issuance, which is on the next slide, please. So every permit when we look at them, they have to meet reasonable and beneficial use. So the quantities need to be necessary for the economic and efficient use. It has to be both reasonable and consistent with public interest. The source has to be suitable for the consumptive use. Also, is the source capable of producing the requested amount? We require that the lowest quality of water source be suitable for that purpose. So for example, if you can use reclaimed water, we prefer that. You can use surface water or alternative water supplies. That is something that we try to push for so that people are not just withdrawing from the groundwater supply. We make sure that there's no harm to existing offsite land uses. No harm comes to the water resources. And again, like was mentioned earlier, they have to meet minimum flow or levels and implementation of recovery strategies if necessary. Also, we make sure that they will not interfere with any presently existing legal use of water. So if a new permit comes in, it can't have impacts of somebody who already has a water use permit has been issued. On all permits, conservation conditions are placed on them, and we monitor them as best as we can. And let's see, what I wanted to make another comment with our permits that come in for quantities over 100,000 gallons per day on an annual average basis. They all need to submit a conservation plan with their permit application. So that's all I have so far on this. Katie, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Let me get mine up. So I'm Katie Gilmore, and I'm the Water Division Manager for Manatee County. Let's see. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Let me get one more thing up. Okay, so in my role for the county, I oversee the water treatment plant and the water treatment plant lab and the distribution system and our water conservation and compliance. So today I wanted to give you a little more detail here on Manatee County's water system, a brief history, go over our current status, what we're seeing as far as what our supplies are and what our demands are, then what we're planning for the future, and of course, touch on water conservation and water quality as well. Okay. All right, so a brief history. Our water system really came into effect in the mid-60s when we constructed the Lake Manatee Reservoir and the water treatment plant. Prior to that, there was a huge series of about 150 private water systems in Manatee County, City of Braden and Palmetto. Most of these, of course, are groundwater wells. They were being impacted by droughts and by saltwater intrusion. So a report in the early 60s suggested that Manatee County consolidate on an alternative water source of surface water. So the Manatee River was dammed and Lake Manatee was formed. It's about 1,800 acres in size, and it can hold 6 billion gallons of water when full. The water treatment plant was constructed, and it could treat and produce for the citizens of Manatee County about 12 million gallons per day. Over the next few years, we expanded on that water treatment plant first in 1975 to bring our ability to treat up to 27 million gallons per day. Again, in 1980 to get to our current surface water capacity of 54 million gallons per day. Also in the mid 80s, we made an effort to begin to purchase acreage in our watershed. About 20,000 acres were purchased. That became Duet Preserve. That's out in eastern Manatee County. And owning that land, about 40% now of our watershed is in public ownership. And we also have a watershed overlay district. What that does is that gives us control over the type of activities that can occur on that land, and that protects our water quality in Lake Manatee. Okay, so in 1989, we had a consumptive use permit to pull up to 34.9 million gallons per day from the lake. That's currently still the amount we're allowed to produce from the lake. In the mid 80s, there was also a pretty significant drought in Manatee County, and the level of the lake dropped very low. There was definitely concern that that lake was going to be sustainable in the future. And so the decision was made to actually add a groundwater source to diversify our supply sources. So out in Duet Preserve in eastern Manatee County, where we own that watershed land, we developed the East County well field. It was originally 5 wells. They're 1,200 feet deep, very deep into the Florida Aquifer. We had a permit to pull 12 million gallons per day from the well field. And then we expanded our treatment plant in order to treat up to 30 million gallons per day of groundwater that we could then blend with the surface water from Lake Manatee. We expanded that well field in 2009 with the addition of 2 more wells, and we're able to get additional water use permit quantities up to about 16 million gallons per day. And then in 2016, we actually increased that permit again. This time we use a process where we did groundwater replacement credits. So these days they're not permitting a lot of new quantities for groundwater. They're focusing on alternative water sources. But if you can retire credits from an existing permit, then you can apply a portion of that to a new permit. So in this case, Schroeder Manatee Ranch had 4 million gallons per day of water use permit that they were using to irrigate, I think on the tree fields. And so they were able to retire that credit, transfer it to us. We had to leave a portion in the aquifer, and we were able to get 3.1 million gallons per day of their original 4. So this helps provide a benefit to the aquifer and transfer this water to a water supply source, and we provided them with reclaimed water for their irrigation. It is just conjunctive use, which means it's a flexible quantity. So we can use up to that 19 on the groundwater side or that 34.9 on the surface water side, but that additional 3.1 didn't get added to our total. The next few slides are just a few pictures, so you can see how the plant has grown over the years. This one shows Lake Manatee up there on the north and the north, and the dam over on the left-hand side of the picture. And then the very bottom is the original treatment plant. So it's just enough to treat that 12 million gallons per day from the lake. And then of course we have the treatment facilities there. This is a picture of what it looks like essentially today. This is actually a few years ago. And so that shows an additional surface water basin added. It shows our groundwater treatment train added. And you can see the water tower as well as the 2 water ground storage tanks. We have about 21 million gallons per day of on-site storage at the plant. We have a total of about 32 million gallons per day for our system. So we can store finished water in case the plant needs to be offline for a few hours. And this one just shows some of the current construction. We've added a few new treatment processes over the years just to improve water quality and to meet regulations better. So this is December of this year. We're currently hopefully completing soon about a $60 million project to upgrade the surface water treatment process to provide a better quality of water and to ensure that we meet some of the water quality regulations as they get tighter and stricter in the future. All right, so currently we hold what we call our consolidated water use permit. We combined our lake permit and our East County well field permit in 2012. And we also at that time were able to permit additional quantities from a future supply source identified as the Buffalo Creek well field. This will be a well field where we can pull 3.95 million gallons per day. This is brackish groundwater, and it will go through a reverse osmosis treatment process. So it's not fresh groundwater, it's an alternative water supply source. And you'll see on my next few slides, we have that identified as our next supply that we'll develop. And we already have those quantities permitted. We also hold a joint permit with Mosaic to get 1.96 from a well field that they have in our watershed. They provide us that 1.96 million gallons per day. And so total we have, if you add those numbers up, it's just under 60 million gallons per day of water that we have the rights to. But of course, 3.95 of those are not constructed yet, and 3.1 million gallons per day is a flexible quantity. So in reality, we have just under 53 million gallons per day. So the question is, is that enough? And we'll get to that in a few slides. Quickly, just showing you a graphic so you can see where the water plant is located, where it says WTP. The blue shaded area is our watershed, and you see that green shaded area is Duet Preserve. So we own about that 40% of our watershed. The various well fields are shown on there also. This picture also shows the Evers watershed. That's the watershed for Ward Lake, which is the reservoir for the city of Bradenton. So they have their own water supply source and distribution system. And we also have where it says their Lake Manatee ASR wells, that's aquifer storage and recovery. So we can recharge wells on our property with finished water and then pull that back up in an emergency. So we have a permit to pull up to 10 million gallons per day for up to 6 months if we needed that water, and that system's fully recharged and waiting. We currently serve, based on our 2020 Public Supply Annual Report, a functional population of 378,391 people. We serve the unincorporated areas of Manatee County west of the lake. That's our development boundary line. And also we retail to the cities on Anna Maria Island. We do have 4 wholesale customers. So as I mentioned, the city of Bradenton has their own supply source. We are interconnected with them, and we serve in about 0.5 million gallons per day. We also are the sole water supplier for the city of Palmetto and the town of Longboat Key, with 2 and 2.5 million gallons per day in our contracts. Both of them maintain their own distribution system, but the water is ours. And then Sarasota County, we've been serving since about 1975. That contract has slowly stepped down over the years as they've developed their own water supplies and also taken more water from the regional supply authority. Right now, we're in our last phase with them, and we are contracted for up to 5 million gallons per day, and that'll go down to 0 in 2025. And so again, just our retail service area, and you in the brownish orange, and you can see the green is where we wholesale. Okay, so we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that since 2010, the population has grown by about 24%, and you can see how the water demands have increased. So currently in 2020, annual average day production at our plant is close to 44 million gallons per day. And what you can see is how it's changed over the last 10 years. And you can look at this in a few different ways. If you look at it over 10 years, it's increased about 20%, so 2% per year. But those last 2 years were over 5%, 2 years in a row. So that's concerning, and we need to figure out if that's going to be long-term growth at that rate, which is probably not sustainable, but what is that number really going to be? In 2021, the year to date, if we look at just January through the end of September, is about 1% over 2020. So we're already seeing that we're not going to have another 5% year. Okay, so but we of course always are planning for the future to ensure that we do have the water to provide. And so when we're planning for water supply and demands, we really need to answer 3 questions. You know, one is how fast will those demands increase? And of course, that's the hard question to answer, but we have ways of trying to project that, and we're constantly refining that. And then once we know that number, what triggers the need and the timing for new supply? So at what point do we need to make sure we have that next water supply developed and constructed and permitted so we can provide it? And then of course, where would that supply come from? So we do our demand projections every year. We refresh them in December. And then we also do an in-depth review about every 5 years when we work through our water supply facilities work plan. That gets triggered by SwiftMud's regional supply plans. We're required to have ours done no later than I think May of next year. We should be done by the end of 2021. And this is actually a good time to refresh those demand projections because we just got the 2020 census numbers. So we're working through looking at that a little bit more detailed about what we think those projections will be. But when we do this, we look 20 years into the future. So every year we're refreshing that 20-year time frame. And then we have an internal goal of once our system demand, so the amount of water people in the county are using, reaches 90% of our current permitted and ability to produce supply, then we need to have something new come online. So we keep about a 10% reserve capacity. And then as I'll go to the next few slides, we do have options identified, both locally and on a regional level. Okay, so what are we going to do? The first thing is those 3.1 million gallons per day of flexible quantities we got in our permit through the groundwater replacement process was written in that once we can show the need for those, we can convert those quantities to permitted allocation. So we're going through the process now. We'll do a permit renewal in 2022. And so we'll add that on. We already had the ability to pump that water. We already had the ability to treat that water. It's just we need to be permitted to be allowed to use that on a daily basis. Then in 2025, Sarasota County drops off. So that's an additional 5 million gallons per day that we're not selling to Sarasota County that we have available to serve the citizens of Manatee. And then we look into the future. So these next few years are tentative because things can always change, but The next project is going to be that Buffalo Creek reverse osmosis well field and water treatment plant. Once we treat that water, it'll produce about 3 million gallons per day of finished water. Based on our 2020 demand projections, we were looking at about a 2033 timeframe. Looks like it might be a year or two earlier when we finish up what we're doing right now, but it's about 3 to 5 years to design and construct that. So we're still definitely ahead of the game, and it'll be online by the time we need it. And then after that, the next thing we've identified is that at some point we will purchase water from the Peace River Minnesota Regional Water Supply Authority. So Jack mentioned them. We are a member, but we're the only member that does not currently purchase any water. So Sarasota, Charlotte, and DeSoto all do. The city of Northport is also a customer, but they're required when their members request water at least 7 years in advance to develop those supplies. And they have things identified to develop those future supplies. So we think we'll need about 5 million gallons per day from them in about 2037. And then, of course, we're always looking to see if that's what we need to do. I'm getting a lot of feedback. If somebody's not muted, can you please? There you go. All right. We're always looking for other options. So, of course, we would love to be able to get some additional quantities permitted in our East County well field, because that treatment plant can treat up to 30 million gallons per day. And right now we're only permitted for around 19. So we have additional treatment capacity. But again, being that fresh groundwater, it would have to go through a groundwater replacement credit process to get any, so that we were giving a benefit to the aquifer, not just pulling more water. We'd have to leave more water in than we're pulling out by retiring. The good news is, as most of you know, as Manatee County develops, a lot of what turns into development was former agricultural land, and there are usually groundwater permits on those lands. So there's the potential to do some negotiation if we can provide some of these newer developments that take that land with reclaimed water for their irrigation. Then we can maybe negotiate to get some of the groundwater credits, leave some of that water in the ground, and transfer the rest of it out to our East County well field. All right, so this is all that information put on a graph, and this is what we do on an annual basis. We do a water demand and supply update, where we're looking out at a planning period of 20 years. And the black and the gray line are demands. So that black line is our projected demands moving forward from 2020 until 2040. The gray line looks at our demands plus 10%, so the reserve capacity. And then the blue line shows supply. The light blue line is what we have today, and then the dark blue line is what we're planning. So what we want is to make sure that the dark blue line always stays ahead of that gray dash line. And as you can see, our demands start to go up. They drop off in 2025 when Sarasota County contract goes away. And then, of course, they continue to go up. So it's the slope of that dark black line and the gray line that can change, but we're refreshing this every year. And if we need to move some of those projects in the future up a year or so, we will have time to do that. All right, but as you can see, of course, we are going to eventually need new supplies. What we have now is not going to solely provide for us in the future, but we have options both locally and regionally. These new supplies aren't going to be as cheap as what we have now. The cheapest thing, of course, would be just to add water to our well field and be able to treat that in a plant that's already been constructed. But once you're talking about developing new treatment plants and drilling new well fields, then that price goes up. And so obviously stretching what we currently have through water conservation, and I know Jack focused on that, and giving reclaimed water to customers so they're not using it on their lawns is definitely much cheaper than developing a new supply. So this slide just shows our per capita water usage for Manatee County over the last 40 something years. It's the gallons used per person per day. The orange line 150 is what SwiftMud requires us to be below currently. And as you can see, over the years, we've made quite a bit of progress on getting those numbers down through our water conservation programs. It's been a little bit stagnant this last decade, and actually the last year or two, it went up. And we kind of know why it went up in 2020. There definitely was some changes in water use patterns with COVID. And so we're hoping to make some strides to get that going back down. And we do that through our department. We have a water conservation program. As April mentioned, it is part of our permit requirements to have that. But we do, and we're very proud of the work they do. Some of the key components, of course, we follow the SwiftMud year-round watering restrictions, only allowed to water your lawn 2 times per week. We also restrict and prohibit the use of potable water now for irrigation for new development. They're required to use the water of lower quality. So irrigation wells or surface water ponds for irrigation or reclaimed water if available. We have a very extensive reclaimed water system in the county. Our water conservation staff do a lot of community outreach. Unfortunately, that got curtailed the last year with COVID because a lot of what they do is in the schools, especially the elementary schools. It's really important to reach children. They bring that message home to their parents with a lot of enthusiasm. And then, of course, it teaches them for the future. We still do other community events, and we're hoping to be back in the schools soon. We'll be out this Friday night at the Halloween event at GT Bray, for example, with a booth. We also have a rain barrel program, so you can get a rain barrel and a connection kit for about $30 through our staff, so you can harvest some of the rainwater from your roof to use on your lawn. And then we have some rebate programs, both an indoor program with our toilet rebate program, where you can replace an older high flow toilet with a low flow one and get a rebate back on the cost. And then we have some outdoor programs that get run through our IFAS extension office, where you can drill an irrigation well or install a cistern and then apply for a certain portion of that back. Unfortunately, some of these rebates are a little bit outdated. The qualification requirements are based on some outdated dates and requirements. So we're going through the process now of looking at those rules and refreshing them, and hopefully also adding some newer technologies, with the goal really being we want people to be encouraged to do some of these things outdoors, get money back, and then actually save water as well. Because as mentioned earlier, using highly treated potable water outdoors really is wasteful, and we want to conserve that for using indoors for drinking. And then just very quickly touch on water quality. Of course, everything we do through the utilities department is important to make sure that we're providing not just enough water, but safe water to drink. We're regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act through EPA, which gets promulgated down in Florida through the Department of Environmental Protection. We meet all requirements and we're required to notify the public if we ever did not. We have our own staff. We have a National Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Conference certified quality control laboratory that works out of our water treatment plant. We run over 50,000 analyses per year, both on things we're required to per regulation, and also just doing our own research and our own understanding of our watershed and our reservoir, for example. And then, of course, at the treatment plant, that plant is running 24 hours a day. The operators on staff are taking samples throughout the various steps of the treatment process every couple of hours to make sure everything's working properly, and that the ultimate product is a safe product that meets all water quality regulations. And then all public water supply systems are required to report their data annually to their customers through a consumer confidence report or a water quality report. That's available on the Manatee County website for everybody to view. Typically, the new ones are up around March or April for the previous year. All right, and I think we'll go to questions for everybody now. And here's my contact information, our website to take you directly to the water page, and that water.saver email if you have any questions about water conservation. If you wanted to talk to some of our staff to schedule an outreach event, we also do adult groups like HOAs, for example, or if you have any question about the water conservation rebate programs. And I'll stop sharing, and I think we're ready to take questions from the group now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all the presenters. Absolutely outstanding information. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to really focus on what I think are the most critical questions. And the first one I have is a question I think it's to Dennis and April, about self-reporting, and how does the water district staff verify their reports, self-reports?
Sure, yeah, and I'll let April handle that as well, and then we'll go ahead and I'll just knock out two questions if that's all right, Stephen. That was addressed. Okay, so yeah, April, can you address that one, and then also the one followed by Betsy Benak after? All right, thank you.
I'll look it up. So most permittees, anything over 100,000 gallons per day on an annual basis, they're required to report their meter readings. We do, if they go over their amount, they're on an over pumpage list, and we don't have many of those. Staff does go out and verify with those ones that we know there's a problem with. Sometime every 5 years, the permittee has to do meter accuracy test, and that is where we can catch people if their meters have been maybe over reporting or even under reporting. But that's how we make sure everything is staying in compliance. For our big users, mostly they have annual reports that are submitted that my staff get assigned and they review, which we also then will go out into the field and do field verifications to make sure the data that we have is kind of matching what's going on in the field. Let me see. Hopefully that helps with that one. And what was the other question? I'm trying to get to the chat part.
Yeah, sure. It was, have a couple questions. At one point, the groundwater quantity permitted for agricultural use cannot be converted to urban use without a reduction in the permit. I understand that a proposed development is stating that they can now transfer all of their permitted groundwater under an ag permit to public water supply for their own. Can you please clarify?
Yeah, so that's not true. If you're going from one use type to another use type, there's a 10% reduction that goes back to the resource. And usually we typically do historical use. So if a permit has not been using their quantities, even though let's say there was 200,000 gallons on that permit, but they've only been using 100, that 100 minus the 10% would only be what is allowed to be transferred. If the owner is the same from on the ag permit, and now that owner does have, if that they are turning it into their own development, the use change still is the 10%, so it would still be decreased by that amount. So I'm not too sure about them saying that they can transfer the entire amount. That doesn't seem correct to me as far as our rules go.
Okay, thanks. Katie, can you, I have a couple questions for you. Can you clarify how the population projections are created? Does faster growth require you to update population projections? How about growth outside the FDAB?
Yes, so the FDAB, the Future Development Area, I think, boundary. When we do our population projections, we are looking specifically at our water service area. So it's not just Manatee County as a whole. We're looking at our water service area. Over the years, we haven't updated more frequently than annually. So each year that could change. So if we're seeing faster growth, then we're looking at what's happened historically, and we're looking at a few different projection methods. So there's the ones that SwiftMud does. There's like the Bieber levels, high, medium, and low. And that's kind of, we're kind of trying to decide what fits best. So we look at the different projections, we look at historically what they fit with, and then we kind of pick one to go with. That's why we do it every year, because we have these increases in growth and they might last for a couple of years, then they go back down. Like I said, the census for 2020 had kind of helped us reset things. And this year we're looking at it with our in-depth look at a little bit differently. We're looking more at some of these population projections and not just historical use, but we're looking at some of our level of service standards for the number of people we have. But we're still just doing it once a year, but we tweak it a little bit based on what we're seeing.
Another question in regards to the water supply is, what have you done, or what provisions have we made to accommodate a long-term drought?
I mean, pretty much what we've done is just ensure that we've diversified those supply sources. That was the reason for developing groundwater and having those, and they're deep groundwater wells. So the wells themselves are definitely drought resistant. They're not affected by any kind of droughts we'd see here. The lake level could be. So, as we could pull more from the groundwater and reduce what we pull from the surface water, and that will stretch out what we have in the lake. And of course, we also have the aquifer storage and recovery. So again, that's 10 million gallons per day for up to 6 months. So that's an additional emergency supply. Moving forward, we are a member of the Peace River Authority. Right now, we don't have that final connection to them. They'll develop that before we need to be a customer, and probably a little bit earlier. They're in the process of extending a pipeline up to Sarasota County, which should get very close to our interconnect with Sarasota County, in which case potentially they could push water to us in an emergency. So that regional authority has their own supply sources, and then each of the customers have their personal supply sources. So the region come together to push water to somebody that's having an issue. Of course, if it's a drought, we're all affected, right? But certain areas might be affected more than others. So that's part of the purpose of having those regional supply authorities, is for emergency backup to each other as well.
Okay, one last question for you, Katie. Is the potable water supply contaminated by Piney Point issues?
It's not, and we're not concerned about it. Our wells are 30 something miles from Piney Point, and they're 1,200 feet down, so they're not being affected. Our surface water lake, the watershed is to the east of Lake Manatee, so it's not affected by Piney Point. So that's not a concern for the public supply for Manatee County.
Okay, and Jack, I have one question for you, and it has to do with a slide you showed showing Sarasota County with clay confining layer. And the person is asked, says they believe the same is true for Manatee County. Is that the case? Jack?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, okay, there, sorry, I was unmuting. There is a clay confining layer beneath our region that creates part of that intermediate aquifer, I think, and any of those other speakers might want to speak to that. But yeah, and again, we're using in Sarasota County some of the intermediate aquifer systems. And in some cases, the water is not potable without treatment. And at the Carlton Reserve, they're doing electrodialysis, basically desalination.
okay. Thanks. I have, Katie, I have another question for you. And you alluded to that we're going to be paying more for water. And I was just thinking about moving towards the usage of brackish water and doing reverse osmosis. And that does sound expensive to me as we begin to move into using brackish water. Is that the case? Can we expect water to cost a lot more than we're paying now?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say a lot. So we've been really fortunate in Manatee County because the majority of what we're doing today was developed so many years ago. You know, our treatment plant in our lake has really been the same since like mid 90s until what we're doing recently, that our water cost has been very low. Our water rates have been much lower than the region. And we're fortunate for that. So as you develop these new supplies, yes, reverse osmosis, it takes a lot more energy to produce that water. So we're gonna have to use that. It'll only be a small portion. It'll be 3 million gallons per day. We'll still be producing 50 something from the Lake Manatee plant with the groundwater and the surface water. But you know, kind of that the cheap water that's easy to treat, that doesn't require a lot of investment and energy, that stuff's going away for the whole region, for the whole area. So it's just kind of a note that, you know, we will have the water, we just have to invest in it and pay for it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all our presenters. Alice, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much for all your presenters and all the people that have come to watch the presentation today. Check our website, lwvmanatee.org, for other presentations, and don't forget to vote on November 2nd.